The moment that changed how I think about kindness didn't come from a friend or a family member. It came from a stranger who barely spoke to me. And the strange part is, I almost ignored him completely. At the time, my life had settled into a routine so predictable that most days blended together. I worked at a small marketing office downtown. Nothing glamorous, just emails, meetings, and staring at spreadsheets that felt more important than they probably were. Every morning looked almost identical. I'd leave my apartment around 7:45, grab coffee from the same cafe on the corner, then walk 3 blocks to the subway station. The same train, the same crowd, the same tired faces staring at their phones. It wasn't a bad life, just ordinary. And if I'm being honest, I had developed a quiet belief about people during that time. Most people, I thought, were mostly focused on themselves. Not in a cruel way, just distracted, busy, moving through their own problems. Kindness, in my mind, had become something small and practical. Holding a door, saying thank you, maybe helping someone pick up something they dropped. Polite gestures, nothing deeper than that. At least that's what I believed back then. I first noticed a stranger on a Tuesday morning while waiting for the subway. He stood near the far end of the platform, leaning slightly against a pillar. Older guy, maybe mid-60s. Gray jacket, worn baseball cap. Nothing about him stood out, except that he seemed to be paying attention to people. Not staring, just watching. At first, I assumed he was waiting for someone. But over the next few days, I kept seeing him. Same place, same quiet posture. And something about it made me slightly uncomfortable. Most commuters avoided eye contact entirely. That was the unspoken rule. You stayed in your own bubble until the train arrived. But this guy observed people like he was studying them. One morning, I caught his eyes for a brief second. He gave a small nod. Not a smile. Just a simple acknowledgement. I nodded back out of reflex, then immediately looked at my phone like everyone else. The next morning, same thing. Another small nod. It was oddly polite, but also strange. I remember thinking, why does he keep noticing me? For a few days, I tried standing farther down the platform, but somehow our eyes still met at least once before the train arrived. Eventually, I started arriving a little earlier, hoping to avoid the interaction entirely. Not because he had done anything wrong, just because I didn't understand it. And when people behave in ways we don't understand, it creates a subtle tension. One Thursday morning, the train was delayed. 10 minutes passed, then 15. The platform grew more crowded and slightly impatient. That's when I noticed a stranger doing something unusual. A young woman nearby dropped her Metro card while digging through her bag. It slipped under a bench. Before she even realized it was gone, the stranger calmly bent down, reached under the bench, and picked it up. He tapped her shoulder lightly. "You dropped this." She smiled, surprised. "Oh wow, thank you." He simply nodded again and stepped back. No conversation, no extra words, just a small moment. A few minutes later, something similar happened. A guy rushing down the stairs dropped a folded piece of paper. The stranger picked it up and walked a few steps to return it. Then later, he held the door open for someone struggling with a stroller. Nothing dramatic, just small things. But what struck me was how quietly he did them. No attention, no expectation, almost like it was automatic. Over the next week, I started noticing it more. The stranger was constantly helping people in subtle ways, pointing out when someone dropped something, offering his seat on the train, helping someone lift a suitcase onto the overhead rack. And each time, he did it with the same calm, almost invisible presence. No conversation, just action. It made me curious. One morning, I arrived early again, but this time I deliberately stood closer to where he usually waited. When he noticed me, he gave that same small nod. I nodded back, and before I could overthink it, I asked a simple question. "Do you take this train every day?" His voice was soft but steady. Most days. There was a short pause. Then I said something that had been sitting in my mind for a while. "I've noticed you help people a lot." He looked slightly surprised. Then he gave a quiet half smile. "I suppose I do." I expected him to explain, maybe tell a story, maybe laugh it off, but he didn't say anything else. So I asked another question. "Why?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked out towards the tracks like he was considering how to respond. Then he said something simple that I still remember word for word. "Because most people don't notice when someone needs a little help." I wasn't sure what to say to that, so I just nodded. The train arrived a minute later, and we boarded separate cars. That could have been the end of the story. But the next morning changed everything. It was raining that day. One of those gray, steady rains that makes the entire city feel slower. The subway entrance was crowded with people trying to close umbrellas and shake off water before heading downstairs. I was halfway down the steps when I heard a loud clatter behind me. An elderly woman had slipped on the wet stairs. Not a dramatic fall, but enough that her grocery bag spilled open, sending apples rolling down the steps. People noticed, but most reacted the same way people often do in busy places. They hesitated, just for a moment. That tiny pause where everyone expects someone else to step in. Before I could even think, the stranger was already moving. He carefully helped the woman sit up on the step. "Take a moment," he said calmly. Then he walked down the stairs collecting the apples that had rolled away. I found myself helping without even thinking about it. A few other people joined in too. Within a minute, the apples were back in the bag. The woman stood up slowly. "I'm all right," she said, slightly embarrassed. The stranger handed her the bag and asked if she needed help getting to the train. She thanked him and said she was okay. Then she disappeared into the crowd. The entire moment lasted maybe 2 minutes, but something about it stayed with me. Because what I realized was, the stranger hadn't waited to see if someone else would help. He just acted. Later that morning on the train, I was still thinking about it. That tiny hesitation on the stairs, the moment where everyone looked but didn't move, and then the stranger simply did. A thought crossed my mind that felt uncomfortable at first. How many times have I noticed someone who might need help and done nothing? Not out of cruelty, just out of habit, or distraction, or assuming someone else would step in. That afternoon, something small happened at work. One of my coworkers was struggling to carry 2 large boxes of marketing materials across the office. Normally, I might have noticed and kept typing, but this time I stood up immediately. "Need a hand?" She looked relieved. "Actually, yes, thank you." As we walked the boxes to the conference room, I caught myself smiling slightly. Not because it was a big moment, but because I recognized the shift in my thinking. That evening, as I stood on the subway platform again, the stranger was already there. Same pillar, same quiet posture. When our eyes met, he nodded. This time, I walked over. "I think I understand what you meant yesterday." He tilted his head slightly. I continued, "About noticing when people need help." He gave a soft clutter. "It's not complicated." Then he said something I've thought about many times since. People are usually kinder than they realize. They just forget to look up. The train arrived shortly after, and that was the last time I ever saw him. I don't know his name, I don't know where he went, but over the months that followed, something in my behavior kept changing. I started noticing small things more often. A confused tourist looking at a subway map, someone struggling with a heavy door, a coworker having a rough day. None of these moments were dramatic, but they appeared everywhere once I started paying attention. And each time I helped in some small way, I thought about the stranger on the platform. Because before meeting him, I believed kindness was mostly about intention, about being a good person. But what he showed me was something different. Kindness isn't really about intention. It's about attention. It's about noticing the tiny moments when someone could use a little help and choosing not to look away. And the strange thing is,
once you start noticing those moments, you realize they were always there. You just weren't seeing them before. So now, whenever I catch myself staring at my phone while waiting for the train, I remind myself to look up. Because somewhere nearby, someone might need a small kindness, and most people will walk right past it. The real question is, will I notice?